And what we're gonna do now, very carefully, take them out of the jars, out of the can, and put them on a towel or some sort of pad.
We are going to preserve tomatoes. First, we've come to the garden to pick the fresh tomatoes. See, these are fresh tomatoes picked from the garden. And so Mary Michael's mother is going to teach us how to preserve tomatoes.
So the first thing to do is to start with your equipment. So this is just a simple glass mason jar, and it's been washed and sterilized. You want to make sure it's very clean. And then you want to run your finger around the rim and make sure there are no chips in the glass, because then it won't seal. And the other thing I do is hold it up and make sure there aren't any cracks in the glass, because then the jar will break in the hot water bath. So the other thing we have to sterilize are the lids and the rings. And so I've just put them into a pot with some water, and I'm going to bring the water to a boil, and then these will be all clean and sterilized and ready for canning. The most important item that you need is the proper lid that will seal. And these are just metal discs, but on the inside they have a little bit of rubber ring. And this is the most important part, so that when you put it down on the jar and it creates that suction, it creates that seal. You can't just use any lid. And the ring is what you need to hold it in place during the canning process. Once the lid has sealed on the jar, you can even take the ring off if you want and reuse it. But this you would not reuse. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do before we cut them up and put them in the jars is we're going to blanch them in boiling water, and that's going to take the skin off. Because if you can them with the skin on, sometimes the skins will get a little bit tough. So we're just going to put them down, all sizes and shapes and colors, in this pot of hot water. And we're going to just let them sit in there until we see the skin split apart, and then we're going to drain them. So you see how the skin has started to split here on this tomato? That means it's about ready, and it'll be very easy to peel. So now we're going to drain the tomatoes. Now you don't have to have a draining pot like this. Sometimes I just will cook them in a regular pot, and then I'll pull them out with a slotted spoon.
Home gardening will improve health. Community gardening will ensure food security. Home gardening will provide jobs. Community gardening will help
reduce climate change. So as soon as the tomatoes have cooled enough to handle, you just want to get a knife and take off maybe the top. And as you start to peel it, you'll see that the skin just comes right off. Just like that. And you can cut it. If you want smaller pieces, and just drop it right in the jar. For some of the larger tomatoes, you want to take the core out, because that's just tough. If you see any bad spots on the tomato, you want to take those off. And then same thing, just peel the skin, comes right off. Now you can put it whole in the jar. I like them a little bit smaller, so I'm just going to cut it right in my hand, just in 4 pieces. And then just drop it right in the jar. You want to make sure when you're peeling your tomatoes that you get the bad spots out like this, because if that goes in your jar, it could also cause spoilage, which you don't want. So I just cut it out, but all the rest of the tomato is beautiful. So I'm going to peel it, look it over, cut it, and in the jar. Okay, so once you have your jar pretty full, the next step is to take a spoon and you want to push them down, and you want to make sure you do this because you're trying to get rid of any air bubbles that might have formed in the bottom of the jar. And sometimes if there are air bubbles, that can increase the rate of spoilage. Plus you want to get as many tomatoes in a jar as you can. So I'm going to smash these down a little bit, push them down, and then I'm going to add a few more tomatoes to top it all the way to the rim. Okay, so now we have all of our jars filled with tomatoes, and the next step is you want to make sure the rim is very clean. So I'm just taking just a clean cloth that's wet, and I'm just going to wipe around the outside of the rim, but also the inside. So you want to make sure that you get a good seal. And one way to do that is to make sure you get all the residue off. And so you want it clean on the inside and the outside. Okay, so now we've cleaned all of the rims inside and out, and we're going to put the lids on. So this first piece goes on, and then this is the ring that you're going to put on with it, and you want to get it as tight as you can, because when you put them in the boiling water, you don't want any of your tomato juice to come out. You want to get it on as tight as you can. And then we're going to put it in our pot. Right now the water is not hot, and we have a wire rack to hold the jars, but you don't have to have a rack like this, but you do need something on the bottom of your pot to separate the jar from the bottom of the pot, and it can just be a piece of wire.
Our garden, garden, oh, our garden, our garden, garden, oh, our garden.
Now all the tomatoes are in the jar, and I've just turned the heat on the water, and we're going to let the water heat up slowly, because you want the tomatoes and the water to both get hot together and be about the same temperature. Okay, so now our water is boiling, and we're going to lower our tomato jars down into the boiling water so that they are completely covered. You want the water over the lids. And then we're going to cover it and let them boil in a gentle boil for 45 minutes. All right, so the tomatoes have boiled for 45 minutes. Get it better. And they're very hot, so be careful. Here they are. And what we're going to do now, very carefully, take them out of the jars, out of the can, and put them on a towel or some sort of pad, any kind of surface that can take the heat, because these are very hot. And they look good. None of our jars broke. And they've actually been cooking in the jars, so they're almost kind of like stewed tomatoes. And then the last step, which is just as important as all the other steps, is the cooling process. And so what you want to do is cool them slowly. So we're going to cover them with some towels, completely cover them, and then just let them cool down. And during the cool down process, they're going to get that suction seal. It's going to suck all the air out and create that vacuum seal. So it's a very important process. And you'll hear them every time one seals, it'll go pop, and you'll know another one has sealed. Okay, so the next morning, after your tomato jars have cooled down, you can remove the towels. And the first thing you want to do is make sure that every lid got a good seal. And so you just take your finger and push down on every lid. And if it pushes back at all, then it has not sealed. But if you get resistance for each one, then you know you have a good seal. If it did not seal, then you want to use those tomatoes right away. The other thing you can do is you can take the screw caps off and reuse those, because this is all you need to have your seal. Then you want to put the date on it that you did the canning, and it's good to use the tomatoes within a year. They might last into a second year, but it's recommended to just use them within the year. And the last thing you want to do is get a clean cloth, maybe a wet cloth, and you want to wipe your jars all down, get any residue from the boiling bath off, and that's it. Then you're all ready. You have your tomatoes for the whole year. And that's just another way to home garden in Ghana.
The world is changing and access to safe food is becoming a challenge. But growing your own food at home and having a community garden can provide a solution. Home and community garden comes with a lot of benefits, so get involved today.